Okay. Now, your first speaker today. Here we go again. It's these wonderful things that happen to people, these ordinary people, just going on with their lives. You know, here's a lawyer, just living his ordinary life. He's like, hey, I'm just doing my business thing. Meets his guide in the middle of the road. You know, how often does that happen? He's like, but that's the way it goes. When it's time to change your life, it's time to change your life. Right? Hey, gotta go another direction. It's time to go. And I just love his story. It is so beautiful. It is so fantastic. And the adventures that he has, it's so fantastic. He now has 3 books out with us. So, what I'm wanting to say is the continuing adventures with Albert. So Garnet now has, because that's what it really is, Garnet and the continuing adventures with Albert, because that's really what he does. He continues to have all these wonderful, jaunts where he continues to keep going. Albert takes him on all these adventures, and that's what these books are about. And he tells us all about everything all the journeys he goes on. And we get to see where he goes and what he's doing. So his first book was Dancing on a Stamp, and that's where he was sharing with, this is exactly what happens, and this was his journey, his waking up period. Okay, and then Dancing Forever with Spirit was where he started taking him on the adventures. Well, now his latest book is Dance of Heavenly Bliss, and it just came out. I mean, it's pretty much hot off the press. Just came out, and then that's where the latest adventures, where he's going to talk about today. Yes, and I can't wait to hear. So, without further ado, Garnet Schulhauser.
Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Julia, for that wonderful introduction. Well, I'm delighted to be back at the Transformation Conference for 2016. This is my 3rd speaking engagement at the TC. My first engagement was in 2013 when I spoke about my first book, Dancing on a Stamp. And then last year at the 2015 TC, I spoke about my second book, as Julia mentioned, Dancing Forever with Spirit. And today I'd like to talk about my 3rd book, Dance of Heavenly Bliss, which just was released in March. So what I'd like to talk today is a few highlights from my 3rd book, Dance of Heavenly Bliss. My spirit guide, Albert, took me on a series of astral adventures, which I describe in my 3rd book. And he took me to the spirit side, where I met with a number of very distinguished, famous souls on the spirit side, including Moses, Jesus and his mother Mary, Lucifer, and the goddess Athena. And he took me to the Akashic Records, where I got to view an ancient human civilization that lived among the dinosaurs, and the building of Stonehenge with the help of visitors from the stars. And he took me to a cavern under the North Pole, where I got to meet with Gaia, the consciousness of Mother Earth. And in the Pacific Northwest of America, I got to meet with a Sasquatch named Zana. And in the Emerald Island of Ireland, I got to meet a beautiful little fairy called Brina. He also took me to visit a planet many light years away from Earth, where I got to visit a matriarchal society that was ruled entirely by women. And then he took me on a very frightening encounter with a black hole in the center of our galaxy. But before I get into the details of my 3rd book, I'd like to give you a bit of background about myself and my first meeting with Albert. I grew up in Canada and was raised in a very religious Roman Catholic family. After high school, I somehow ended up in law school, and after I graduated from law school, I went to Calgary, where I began a corporate law practice that lasted for about 34 years. But over the years, my religious upbringing lost its influence slowly, and I began to question a lot of the beliefs that I was taught as a child. And I soon rejected many of the dogmas of the Catholic Church, and I began searching for a new paradigm to latch onto. And I constantly asked myself the eternal questions of life. Who am I? Why am I here? What is my life's purpose? And what happens to me when I die? And then one fateful day in 2007, my life was transformed, and all my questions were answered. It happened when I was walking down the street one sunny afternoon. And I was a typical corporate lawyer, very buttoned down, straight-laced, stuffed shirt, kind of a lawyer, walking down the street in my navy pinstripe suit. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a homeless man jumps out in front of me. And he looked like a typical homeless man. He had long, stringy hair, a scraggly beard, and dirty, slept-in clothes. But I didn't step around him, as was my usual move when I encountered homeless people, because he had these amazing, dazzling blue eyes that shone like two little blue stars. And his gaze, I felt that he was penetrating deep within me, right down to the depths of my soul. And I felt that he somehow knew everything about me, everything I'd ever said or done in my life, and he knew my hopes and aspirations, and all my fears and anxieties, and my deepest and darkest secrets, which was surprising because we had never met before. But I didn't feel violated, because at the very same time, his eyes were sending me a wave, an amazing wave of pure, unconditional love that was infusing my whole body with an amazing sense of peace and security and well-being. It was a wonderful feeling. So I stood there like a deer caught in the headlights, like I was in a time warp. I'm not sure how long I stood there, but he finally broke the spell by saying to me, "Why are you here?" And then he promptly disappeared into a nearby store. Well, when I finally collected my wits, I went into the store to find him, but he was nowhere to be seen. So I walked back out onto the street, and I walked up and down, hoping to spot him, but he had seemingly disappeared into thin air. So the very next day, I went back to the same street at the same time, hoping I could find him. And after walking up and down several blocks for 15 or 20 minutes, I finally spotted him sitting all alone on a bench. So I went up to him and I said, "Who are you, and why did you stop me the other day?" And he said, "I'm a soul just like you, and I'm here to answer your questions and help you on your journey." And that was the beginning of a dialogue that went on for several months after that. And I found out his name was Albert, and he was actually one of my spirit guides in disguise. And he told me that I was the only one who could see him in physical form as the homeless man. And so had anybody been passing by that bench that day, they would have seen me sitting all alone, talking to myself. And when I asked him later, why did he, and he only appeared in physical form for the first 3 encounters I had with him. And after that, he was just a voice in my head, and we communicated by telepathy. And when I asked him why he appeared initially in the form of a homeless man, he said it was his way of easing me into the conversation. Because had he just started talking to me out of the blue as a voice in my head, I likely would have thought I was losing my mind. And he's right, I probably would have. So it was a very clever way for him to introduce himself to me and get me comfortable with the fact that he was my spirit guide and I was talking to my spirit guides. And before that, I wasn't even aware I had spirit guides, so it was quite a revelation for me. And he told me early on that he had chosen me to be one of his messengers. Apparently he has a lot of messengers on our planet. I was just one of them. And he told me he wanted me to write a book about the revelations he was about to give me. And I was taken aback by that a bit, because I'd never even dreamed in my wildest dreams that I would ever write a book. But after some gentle persuasion from Albert, I finally resigned myself to writing the manuscript for my first book, Dancing on a Stamp. And in this book, Albert revealed many what I would call startling revelations about life, death, the afterlife, and God. Many of which, or in fact most of which, flew in the face of what Christian holy men had been preaching for centuries. And all of these are set out in my first book, Dancing on a Stamp. So then my second book, Dancing Forever with Spirit, describes my second set of encounters with my spirit guide, Albert. Only this time it was a different format. I woke up in my bed one night and I saw a ghost-like ethereal figure standing in the doorway of my bedroom. And when it moved closer, I could see it was my old friend Albert, but he was in astral form. And I said to Albert, "Hi Albert, nice to see you again. What brings you here this time?" And he said, "I'm here to take you on a series of astral trips, out-of-body adventures. I'm going to take you to the spirit side, to other places in the universe, to other places on your planet, because I want you to write about what you see and hear in your second book." And he said, "I believe a picture is worth 1,000 words. That therefore I'm going to take you places where you can actually see firsthand for yourself what I'm showing you, and then it'll be much easier for you to describe them in your second book." And so then he reached out and he grabbed my astral hand, pulled my astral body out of my physical body. I turned around and looked, and I could see my physical body still lying in bed. So then, with him holding my hand, we rose up through the ceiling, up through the clouds, and we hovered above our beautiful planet for a few moments before he finally took me through a shimmering doorway that was floating in space to the spirit side. Once I stepped through the doorway, I was once again in the beautiful meadow I had encountered in my first set of trips with Albert. It was filled with lush green grass, tall, majestic trees, and wildflowers resplendent in 1,000 different colors. So many colors that we can't even imagine because we don't have them on Earth. It was an amazingly beautiful place. And I delighted in the perfume and the fragrance wafting up from the flowers in this meadow. And then Albert led me on a stone path towards a white city called Gaia. Eventually we came to a very majestic building lined with pillars in the front, which Albert called the Hall of Wisdom. And there we entered a large chamber with a high domed ceiling. In the middle of the room was a table in the shape of a horseshoe, and seated behind it were 11 regal souls. They all had snow-white hair and smooth, unwrinkled skin. And I recalled from my first visit to the spirit side with Albert that this was the Council of Wise Ones. And they are a committee of very wise and advanced souls whose job it is to oversee all the incarnations on Earth. The chair of the council, her name is Sophia, she spoke to me. She said that the council was not happy with the progress being made by humanity in terms of getting rid of their negative emotions, curtailing their violence and abuse, and learning to embrace love and compassion. She said that humans let their negative emotions rule too much of their lives. Things like fear, anger, hatred, greed, jealousy. And that results in a lot of violence and conflict on our planet. And she reminded me that it's important for humans to try to expand their consciousness, raise their vibrations, so they can ascend to Earth in a higher dimension, known to many as the New Earth. Sophia asked me to continue my astral trips with Albert so that I could write about what I saw and heard in my second book. And she hoped that if people could read what I saw in my trips with Albert, that might help many people find their way on the path to spiritual enlightenment. So anyway, my trips with Albert were very much in tune with and in fact orchestrated by the Council of Wise Ones. So we left the spirit side, and the first stop with Albert on this set was at an aquarium in California. And there I met up with an orca, or a killer whale, named Yolanda. We communicated by telepathy, and she told me that whales and dolphins are highly intelligent, sensitive, emotional creatures who only want to live in harmony with their planet and all the other creatures on the planet, including humans. And she was dismayed at the abuse that humans had been heaping on her kin over the centuries when they were killed by whaling ships, trapped in nets, imprisoned in water parks, and poisoned by our pollution. Yolanda had been born freely in the Pacific, where she was free to roam the oceans, and that had all come to an end when she was captured by humans and put into this aquarium, where she was forced to perform silly tricks for spectators who didn't seem to care about her plight. She desperately wanted to leave her concrete prison and go back to the Pacific, where she could frolic freely in the blue waters. And she implored me to send her message to my fellow humans that it was wrong to imprison these creatures in water parks and wrong to abuse them. And I was very happy to oblige and to describe my encounter with her in my third book. So even though the plight of whales on Earth is a very serious matter, every time I see a picture of a whale on TV, I can't help but be reminded of a funny story from my youth. It happened when I was in the first grade. Our teacher, Miss Prentice, was teaching the class about whales. And when she finished, she said to the class, "Does anyone have any questions?" So one little girl in our class put up her hand and said, "Do whales swallow people?" Miss Prentice said, "No, whales can't swallow people because they have throat pleats that filter out their food of plankton and krill." But the little girl persisted. She said, "But our Sunday school teacher said that Jonah was swallowed by a whale." Miss Prentice said, "No, whales cannot swallow people." The little girl kept on. She said, "Okay, I'll tell you what. When I get to heaven, I'm going to ask Jonah if he was really swallowed by a whale." By now, the teacher was getting angry. She said, "What if Jonah went to hell?" Without missing a beat, the little girl said, "Well, in that case, you can ask him." Out of the mouths of babes, eh? So after Albert, we left the water park and my visit with Yolanda, and Albert continued on his mission. His mission at that stage was to show me some scenes of abuse, animal abuse that humans inflict on our fellow creatures, and he wanted to send me a message. And unfortunately, some of these visits were very distressing for me. But there's an important message there, and I put them in my book, and I will describe them briefly to you. So my next stop was in a large urban park in a city on the east coast of America. And there I watched a little boy, Riley, playing fetch with his Cocker Spaniel, Rascal, while his dad was sitting on a bench absorbed in his smartphone. Well, it was a fun game until Riley threw the ball over a hedge near the edge of the park. So Rascal goes scrambling around behind the hedge to find the ball, except he was snatched up by a young man named David, who threw him into the back of his van and sped away. So Albert and I, we're traveling in astral form, of course, so we can sort of travel anywhere. So we followed this van outside the city to a farm near the outskirts of the city, a farm owned by a man called Butch. And Albert told me that Butch trained dogs for the fighting rings. He trained dogs to get into the ring and kill other dogs. So David left Rascal with Butch in exchange for some cash. And apparently David did this often. He would snatch dogs from parks and sell them to Butch. And Albert told me that Butch intended to use little Rascal as bait to train one of his fighting dogs to kill. And of course, fighting rings are illegal in most countries, but they still go on despite the fact that they're against the law, unfortunately. So I watched with a sense of foreboding as Butch wrapped duct tape around Rascal's little jaws so he couldn't bite back. Then he put Rascal into the fighting ring. Then he brought his fighting dog, Brutus, an American bull terrier, and dropped him into the ring. Then he watched with delight as Brutus chased poor little Rascal around the ring. Now Rascal was quicker and more agile than Brutus, but soon he became exhausted. And eventually Brutus cornered him and snuffed out his life with a powerful crunch of his jaws to the back of Rascal's little neck. It was a horrible scene to witness, and I really felt badly, especially for the little boy Riley, who would never see his dog again. Anyway, I was devastated by what I saw, but Albert was not finished with me yet. My next trip was to a savanna in Tanzania, in Africa. And there I witnessed a mother black rhino and her day-old calf. And things were quite peaceful until I heard the crack of a rifle, and the mother dropped to the ground instantly, killed with a bullet to her head. The poachers who shot her quickly came up, sawed off her horns, and then sped away, leaving the little baby laying beside his mother, wondering why she wouldn't get up and let him finish his meal. Albert said that I was concerned about the baby dying from starvation because there was no other, mother around to feed him. But I soon found out that I shouldn't have been worried about that, because very soon a pack of hyenas came on the scene and tore the baby to pieces. Albert explained that the poachers killed the mother for her horns because they could sell the horns on the black market in China and Vietnam to people who believed that rhino horns could cure a variety of diseases, including cancer. And because of that, Albert said, rhino horns are actually worth more than their weight in gold. Albert said this was just these two scenes that he showed me were egregious examples of how humans can inflict abuse, unwanted and unwarranted abuse, on the other animals of our planet. And he said that we really need to stop this abuse and try to help our fellow humans stop the abuse of the creatures so that we can learn to live in harmony with them and let them live in peace. So it was clear that Albert was on his mission to tell me about the abuse that humans inflict on animals, but he was clearly also wanted to show me that we need to stop the abuse of our planet, of Mother Earth, with our pollution. So the next stop was under a cavern under the North Pole. And there I met with the consciousness of Mother Earth, Gaia. So Gaia is the life force of our planet, the sum total of all the rivers, oceans, rocks, mountains, and deserts that form part of the third rock from the sun. And I used to think that our planet was nothing more than inert molecules, but I found out that it has a consciousness, and that is Gaia. So I learned that Gaia is very fiercely protective of her flora and fauna. And she wants everyone to live in perfect harmony without any abuse and live in a great ecosystem where everyone can live peacefully and happily, on her surface or wherever they happen to be or under the ocean. She expressed her dismay at all the abuse that humans had been inflicting on Mother Earth by poisoning her rivers and oceans, spilling toxic chemicals onto her soil, and spewing noxious fumes into her atmosphere. And she cannot understand why humans are doing this, because we live on planet Earth as well. She can't understand why we're doing this to our own environment. And she said that way back when, before the Industrial Revolution, humans were not a problem because they didn't cause much pollution and they couldn't really affect many things on the planet. But since the Industrial Revolution, the amount of pollution that we spill onto her soil and oceans and atmosphere has dramatically increased. And she's very dismayed at this. The interesting thing was, she said that she has the ability to fight back. She can actually increase the number and frequency of natural disasters on our planet, such as earthquakes, floods, drought, fires. And she's been doing this a bit more recently. And she says, this is a warning shot across our bow. It's a wake-up call. If we don't change our ways, things could go very badly for the planet and for humans and for all the other creatures. So she's not vindictive. She really likes to have humans on her planet, but she really admitted that her planet would be better off without humans in their current form. And she really wants us to change our ways before it is too late. So as we left the cavern, I told Albert I was surprised that our planet actually had a consciousness. And he says, oh yeah, Gaia has many more secrets up her sleeve. And he agreed to show me a couple of them. So off we went to the Pacific Northwest of America. And there, in a secluded forest, I got to meet a Sasquatch. Her name was Xana. She was about 9 feet tall. She had an ape-like head, and her muscular body was covered with dark brown hair. That's not an actual picture of her. I found that on the internet, by the way. Xana told me that her species originated in Africa eons ago as a result of a now extinct primate being inseminated with sperm from a race of humanoid extraterrestrials. And they've been living on all the continents of Earth except Antarctica, secretly among humans for many, many years. He says that she said that they have decided not to develop any technology, even though they're very intelligent people. They'd rather live close to nature. And they communicate by telepathy. And they've been hiding underground because they view humans as a violent and aggressive race. And they just don't want to have anything to do with us. And she says that they actually have a form of animal radar, which allows them to detect humans from many miles away. And that's why they've been so adept at avoiding detection from humans, except with the odd exception where they leave footprints here and there and somebody spots them. Her parting wish to me was that she wished that the human race could learn to get rid of their violence and aggression so they could live in peaceful coexistence with her race. Well, I was deeply touched by Xana's predicament, and I hope that one day we will be able to see the light and learn to live in harmony with all the other creatures on our planet, including the Sasquatch. But I found out that Albert was not done with his surprises, and he took me across the Atlantic to the beautiful island of Ireland, and there I met with a beautiful little fairy named Brina. She was a beautiful little person, about 3 feet tall. She looked like a tiny, perfect China doll. She told me that the fairies had once roamed freely in Ireland, where they could frolic in the sun and dance in the rain. And all this came to an end when humans arrived on the island. And she said at first they thought that humans were just larger versions of themselves. But then they found out, to their chagrin, that we were violent and aggressive, and we had to be avoided at all costs. So they went into hiding underground, where they've been ever since. And she said that, they're really afraid of humans, and they don't want to start any trouble with us. They don't want to force us out by force, because they're really a peace-loving little race of people. And like the Sasquatch, she said, they really hope that someday humans will become spiritually enlightened and learn to live in peace and harmony with her race, the fairies, as well as with the Sasquatch. Well, by this time, I was getting somewhat dispirited from all these scenes that Albert showed me. And Albert decided to cheer me up. He pointed out that there are numerous acts of kindness being dispensed every day by humans on our planet. And he said we don't really know about them for the most part because the news media likes to focus on negative news. He said that, and so to prove his point, he showed me a number of very heartwarming scenes where there are acts of kindness being dispensed by humans. And I don't have time to go into the details of all these, but they are set out in my third book, Dance of Heavenly Bliss. He reminded me that it is incumbent on all of us to do our best, not only for us to dispense acts of kindness, but to encourage everyone around us to dispense acts of kindness, because acts of kindness have a positive ripple effect. They fan out and they encourage other people to do acts of kindness to everyone they encounter. So it's a very much of a positive ripple effect. I was encouraged by this, but I asked Albert if in the history of our planet were humans always violent and aggressive. I wondered if humans had always been mired in the cesspool of negative emotions. And to my surprise, he said that there had been some human civilizations in our past that actually learned to live in peace and harmony with their environment and with the other creatures. And so he took me back to the Akashic Records on the spirit side. And as you know, the Akashic Records contain the records of every life that's ever been lived anywhere in the universe. And there in one of the viewing rooms, where in the middle of it, there's a big holographic globe that Albert learned how to show me scenes. He knew how to run it, I didn't. And there he showed me a scene of a civilization that lived among the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. This society did not have any technology, and they lived simple lives close to nature. And they did not pollute the planet, and they treated all the wildlife with respect. They killed only what they needed for food and clothing, and there was no waste. And in this society, men and women were equal in all respects. They shared the child-rearing, cooking, cleaning, and hunting duties equally. And because they understood their intimate connection to spirit and to each other, there was no crime and violence. They lived in peaceful coexistence. And I watched with fascination as I saw a small hunting party creep up on a hadrosaurus and kill it with their spears. They quickly chopped it into pieces, strung it on poles, and then scurried back to their walled city. They got inside the walled city just in time before a marauding T-Rex followed them, trying to chase him into the city, but they got behind the wall before he got there. Unfortunately, this civilization perished, along with most of the dinosaurs, when an asteroid hit the Yucatan Peninsula, causing worldwide volcanic eruptions that spewed up smoke and dust and caused basically a nuclear winter that lasted for a couple of years. That's why most of the dinosaurs were destroyed. In this civilization, their village was buried under a couple hundred meters of lava, which is where it still is, and that's why archaeologists have not yet discovered it. Well, that was certainly fascinating, and I said to Albert, do humans exist only on our planet? Are there human civilizations elsewhere in our galaxy? He said, yes, there are. And he agreed to take me to one. He said, I'm going to show you one that you'll find a bit unusual compared to the one you came from. And so away we went to a planet called Thraso, many light years from Earth. After we touched down, I could see I was in a very ultra-modern city with flying cars and moving walkways. And he took me to the Imperial Palace, where we met with the Empress Marpesia, who was elected by the common vote of all the women in their society. Marpesia explained that they were a matriarchal society ruled entirely by women. The men were not allowed to vote or to hold any positions of power or authority. She said that the men were all docile and submissive because they were all chemically sterilized at the age of 3. But she explained that they did not subjugate their men. Their men were free to pursue recreational activities, pursue art, do sports, and just live life joyfully. And she said that they did not miss their sex drive because they never remembered having it. And there were no crime or conflicts in their society because she said the women were always able to reconcile their differences peacefully. And the men caused no problems because they were always compliant and deferential. Women and men did not form partnerships. They did not have sex, obviously. And the babies were artificially incubated with sperm from a sperm bank that was supplied by a few chosen males who were not sterilized. And she explained that many years ago, they were a patriarchal society where violent men subjugated the women. And that all ended when one of their women had a vision in a dream one night that there was a plant in the forest that if it was fed to their men, it would drastically reduce their testosterone levels. And ever since, they've lived in peaceful harmony. Well, that is certainly one way to run a planet. And I told Albert I needed to get out of there quickly before she decided to recruit me. But I wondered as I left if there wasn't some happy middle ground between the extremes of that matriarchal society and the male-dominated world of my own planet. I think it would be wonderful if men and women could be truly equal on our planet in every respect. Even though I know there's always going to be a few subtle differences because of the fact that some of us tend to think with the right side of our brain and others with the left side. An example of this cognitive differences between men and women was brought home to me a while back when I noticed a humorous post on Facebook. It was obviously written by a man who felt he was being nagged too often by his wife about fixing things around the house. And the post said, "When a man says he will do something, he will do it. And there's no need to remind him every 6 months." Well, as we left this Matriarchal Society, I asked Albert if this civilization had ever visited our planet. And he said no, they had not yet done so because they hadn't learned how to travel between the stars. But he reminded me that there are many other alien civilizations that are currently visiting Earth and have visited Earth over the centuries. And he agreed to show me an example of one alien civilization that actually played a major role in one of our famous historical sites on our planet. So back in the Akashic Records, Albert showed me a scene from one of my previous lives as a Druid priest living on the Salisbury Plain of England about 3000 BC. And I watched as a starship landed nearby, and out came an 8-foot human. His name was Mogons, and he came from a planet in the Andromeda constellation. And Mogons got my help to solicit the villagers to help him build a cosmic beacon he needed to help ships who were in work drive. And so with the aid of laser cutting tools and anti-gravity wands supplied by Mogons, the villagers were able to cut special stones and transport them many miles to the plain in Salisbury. And what they built basically was the structure we now know as Stonehenge. And when the stones were all in place in accordance with very detailed drawings by Mogons, he placed a power box in the center of the structure and then left in the spaceship. And a few years later, actually a few hundred years later, Albert said he came back to retrieve the power box when the beacon was no longer needed. And the villagers never really knew the true purpose of Stonehenge, and they used it for religious ceremonies for many, many years. Well, that certainly explained how those massive stones were cut with precision and moved many miles to the Stonehenge plain by very primitive humans. There's nothing like a little help from your friends from the stars. So at this point, Albert shifted gears, and he said, we're still in the spirit side at this time. He said it was time to meet two famous souls who could help me better understand the cycle of reincarnation on our planet. He said one of them had been a paragon of virtue, and the other one had been an evil monster. Well, for the life of me, I couldn't imagine who I was about to see, but I soon found out. As we once again strolled through the beautiful meadow outside the White City, we came upon two souls seated on a bench having a very friendly conversation. And when I got closer, I did a double take because I recognized who they were. It was Jesus Christ in a white robe and Adolf Hitler in his military uniform. After Albert made the introductions, Adolf Hitler morphed back into his natural appearance on the spirit side. He was actually a handsome young man named Matthew. Matthew said that he had appeared in the Hitler persona initially for me so I would easily recognize him, but then he morphed back into his natural form. I listened intently as Matthew confessed he was deeply sorry for all the crimes and violence and deaths he had caused during his life. And he said that he was anxious to return to earth once again in another incarnation to try to make amends. He told me all of his evil deeds were not pre-planned, but they had resulted when his negative emotions got out of control. And for this, he was deeply sorry. He told me that since he returned to the spirit side, he had met with many of the souls who had died in his death camps. And there had been total reconciliation. Because he said, once souls return to the spirit side, there is no carryover of hatred, animosity, or the need for revenge. And that all souls in the spirit side love each other unconditionally, regardless of what happened to them on earth. He said to me that's one of the most difficult aspects of reincarnation for humans to comprehend and to accept. But he said it's the reality of life on the spirit side. And the whole time while Matthew was speaking, Jesus was nodding his head and smiling. And when it was Jesus' turn to speak, He told me that he had been recruited by the wise ones to come to earth to help humanity on their path to spiritual enlightenment. And during his time on earth, he had learned how to focus his thoughts into very powerful beams of energy, which is why or how he created his miracles that are ascribed to him in the Bible, like walking on water, turning water into wine. When I asked him why he didn't use his powers of focused thought, to prevent his crucifixion, he said that he thought his death on the cross and resurrection would make a more dramatic and powerful statement for his followers, so he let it happen. And he acknowledged that he assumed that his disciples would start a new religion based upon his life and death, but he didn't know how it would all play out. And he told me that he lamented the fact that some of the leaders who followed him were misguided, and they were following their own earthly agendas in their pursuit of power and control. But he said, that's life on the earth as a human. You're never quite sure how it's all going to play out. Well, it was quite a thrill for me to meet Jesus, who is, of course, one of the most influential figures in the history of humankind. He was a very wise and compassionate soul. He's a master. But what surprised me the most about Jesus was that he had a great sense of humor. And during the course of our conversation, he would often drop humorous tidbits here and there. He loved to laugh. You would not get this from reading the scriptures, where everything is very, very serious. And so he told me a few funny stories, and I decided to tell him a funny story, one of my favorites. And he laughed heartily when I told him this story. It seemed that one day Jesus heard a commotion on the outskirts of a small village. And as he approached, he could see a crowd standing around a shallow pit. And there was a man in shackles standing in the middle of the pit. They told Jesus that they were going to stone the man because he had committed adultery. Well, you can all guess what Jesus said. He said, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." And everyone froze because no one wanted to be first. And then Jesus heard a commotion at the back of the crowd. And he heard someone say, "Let me through, let me through." And the crowd parted. And up through the middle came a little old lady carrying a huge boulder. She struggled up to the edge of the pit, promptly dropped the boulder on the man in the pit, smashing his head. Jesus just glared at this lady and said, "You know, Mother, sometimes you really cheese me off." And so then I got to meet another very famous soul who had created miracles or been, part of a miracle scenario as described in the Bible. And this man was the guy who had lived his last life as Moses. And like Jesus, Moses was a master soul, and he too had learned how to focus his thoughts into powerful beams of energy, which is how he created his miracles. So it was Moses who created the plagues that he visited on Egypt to try to convince the Pharaoh to release his people from slavery. And he confessed that he did not really part the Red Sea. He'd actually created an interdimensional passageway for his people to pass safely to escape the Egyptian army. And he also told me that the 10 Commandments did not come from God. He confirmed what Albert had told me previously, that God or the source does not create rules for us to follow. And so the 10 Commandments came from Moses as a result of a period of very deep meditation. So that was certainly a fascinating encounter I had. And Albert then told me that it was time for me to meet a soul who had lived a very violent and tragic life on earth. And he said that not all souls can look back on their lives on earth with pride like Moses and Jesus. And he was going to show me an example of someone who had lived a very tragic and troubled life. So I followed Albert to what he called a re-entry hospital on the spirit side in Gaia. And this is a recuperation facility where souls, newly crossed over souls, if they've had a very tragic or violent death, or if they feel overwhelmed by guilt and remorse for what they did on our planet, they can go there to this hospital and be wrapped in a cocoon of tender loving care by the staff. And there I met a soul who had been a Palestinian terrorist in his last life on earth. His name was Ahmed. And he had been a Sunni Muslim growing up in Gaza. And when he was 7, his house and family were wiped out by a stray Israeli missile. When he was 12, he ran away from his foster home and joined a terrorist group so he could inflict revenge on Israel and all of its people. And when he was 15, he went to a terrorist training camp in Afghanistan, and there he learned how to become much more effective at killing people. And so when he returned to Gaza, he killed many, many innocent Israeli citizens, and he encouraged young people to strap bombs to their bodies and blow themselves up in crowded bus stations or restaurants. In the end, he was killed by Israeli missile during the Hamas-Israeli conflict of 2014. He confessed that during his life on earth, he was not motivated by religious fervor. He said he did not believe in Allah or the dogmas of Islam. The sole motivation for all of his terrible violence was his burning desire to avenge the death of his family. And in the end, he had a secret death wish because he realized he would not be able to stop the killing while he still lived on our planet. But now he was back in the spirit side, and he told me that he was deeply sorry for all the killings he had caused, and he said he had learned much from his life review, and he was eager to go back to Earth again in another incarnation and try to make amends, to try to do better this time. Well, as we left the hospital, Albert said that Ahmed's story was very typical for souls who allow their negative emotions to get out of control, and that often causes a lot of harm, a lot of conflict, a lot of violence to the people around them. So now I was a bit dispirited about having this conversation with Ahmed, and Albert decided that he should try to cheer me up by taking me for another meeting with the Messiah. I was thrilled to see Jesus again, who was having a discussion with the souls who had been his disciples during his time on earth. And when he noticed my presence, he motioned me to follow him, and he introduced me to his mother, Mary. Then he left us, and Mary regaled me with the story of her life on earth as the mother of Christ. She told me that contrary to what the scriptures said, Jesus was not conceived by the miraculous intervention of the Holy Spirit. He was conceived by the sexual union she had with her husband, Joseph. So she was not a virgin when Christ was born. She actually had 4 sons and 2 daughters after Jesus was born. And she told me, contrary to what the scripture said, she said that Jesus married Mary Magdalene when he was 17, and together they had 2 sons and 1 daughter. And when I asked Mary about what happened to Jesus during his so-called lost years, she said that Jesus and Mary Magdalene traveled to Tibet, and there they studied under a Buddhist monk, and that monk helped Jesus learn how to focus his thoughts into powerful beams of energy and to create his miracles. She said that after Jesus was crucified, she and Mary Magdalene smuggled their children out of Palestine into another country, where they grew up, got married, had children of their own, and lived their lives in relative obscurity. And Mary confirmed what Albert had told me previously, that the early leaders of the church edited the scriptures to delete all references to Mary's other children and to the marriage of Jesus. She was truly a very wise and compassionate soul, and she admitted that she had appeared to people over the centuries on earth to give them the message of love and hope, with the hopes of encouraging all humanity to get on the path to spiritual enlightenment. Well, my meeting with Mary was certainly refreshing, and I was very delighted to know that Albert was about to introduce me to another very wise and compassionate soul who played a very important part in my life on earth so far. I was surprised and delighted to meet one of my guardian angels, Anna Peel. She was a strikingly beautiful lady who told me that it was her job to shield me from danger to ensure that I would not suffer an untimely physical death before my soul was ready to leave. This was very interesting for me because when I was growing up, I always wondered if guardian angels were real or just a religious myth. So I was very happy to actually meet one of my guardian angels. She explained to me that, as what Albert had told me before, that no one on earth dies by accident. We die when our soul is ready to leave the incarnation. But because humans have free will to do things on earth, and because we don't remember our pre-birth planning, this clash of free wills could often result in an unforeseen accident that could cause our untimely death. And that is where our guardian angels step in. They will actually intervene to ensure that we don't suffer a physical death before our souls are ready to leave. You know, as an example, she said, supposing you're scheduled to board a plane that they foresee will crash, killing all the people on board. And she said, in that case, they will send initially a strong intuitive message to you to change your plans. And if that doesn't work, they might go to the extent of causing your tire to go flat on the way to the airport so you miss your plane. So they actually can physically intervene when necessary to make sure you don't suffer an untimely death. And when I suggested to her that she must not have been very busy in my case, because I didn't recall any near misses, she just scoffed at my selective memory. And she pointed out 3 examples where she had to basically step in to save my butt, otherwise I would have been killed or injured. And when she reminded me of those incidents, I remembered them, but I thought at the time I had just been lucky to escape death or injury. And now I know that whenever we miss a calamity or there's a near miss, which could cause serious injury or death to us, luck played no part of it. It was our guardian angel stepping in to help us out of that mess. So that was a delightful meeting. And I'm just, that's not exactly what she looked like, but it's the best thing I could find on the internet. She was a very lovely lady, and I really enjoyed talking to her. Then Albert took me to meet another soul who has been playing a very important role in my life as well. When I first met Albert, he told me that he was one of my spirit guides and that I had 2 other spirit guides. But he always declined to tell me who they were. So I was very pleasantly surprised when I got to meet another of my spirit guides. Her name was Elina. And she told me that she had lived her last life on Earth as a member of the Cheyenne tribe in Colorado in the mid-1800s. And she had died tragically at an early age during the Sand Creek Massacre of 1864. She said that she was a member of my soul group and that we had lived many lives together on Earth before in the past. She had joined my spirit guide team in 2008 after I retired from practicing law. And she has been actively working behind the scenes alongside Albert to provide me guidance and direction. She said that she had arranged the meeting with Albert so that I would know that there was somebody else besides Albert who was there to watch over me and provide me with guidance. And so then she said, before I returned home with Albert, I needed to meet another soul, a very wise soul, who could help me with my journey. And so we left the white city of Gaia, walked to the shores of a placid lake filled with crystal clear water, surrounding a little island in the middle with their trees poking up through the mist. And so together we boarded a small boat and we ferried over to this little island. And there Elina took me up the stone pathway to a large stone house near the edge of the shore. And there I was thrilled to meet Athena, the goddess of wisdom. Athena was a ravishing beauty with an aura that was mystical and alluring. She carried herself with a very regal air, but her gracious charm soon put me at ease as she told me the story of her last life on earth. Like Jesus and Moses, Athena was a master soul, and she could use her focused thoughts to perform things that we would call miracles. And she did that to help the people in Athens in those days, and because of this, they deemed her to be the goddess of wisdom. And then she shared some of her thoughts about how humans can hope to find their life purpose on earth. She said determining our life purpose is not easy because it was intended to be difficult, and that most of us have to struggle with this And we often ask ourselves the question, am I on the right track? What is my life purpose? Where should I be going? She said that we need to listen to the subtle guidance and direction we get from our spirit guides. And these messages are very subtle. It's like flashes of intuition, whispers in our minds, gut feelings, coincidental events. These are all things that our guides are sending us to try to steer us in the right direction, to try to get us on the path we had planned for ourselves before we incarnated. So it's not an easy thing to discern this, but she said, there's a couple basic tips. She said, if you feel happy and things seem to be on balance, then you're on the right track. On the other hand, if you feel like you're banging your head against a brick wall, you need to back up and find another route. Well, that was good advice indeed, and I knew that for myself and for probably most humans, it was good advice but very difficult to follow. And Albert said, well, that's just the way it is on our planet. That's why the Earth School is so difficult. So Elina took me back into Gaia. Albert was waiting for us, and he grinned mischievously at me when he said, we were next going to meet the soul who's known as Lucifer, known to many as the Prince of Darkness. This took me by surprise, because Albert had told me previously that Satan did not exist. And so I met with Lucifer, who was a very kind and gentle soul who complained that he had been badly maligned over the years as the personification of evil. He confirmed that Satan did not exist, and Satan was just the invention of religious leaders who used the devil as a tool to instill fear and obedience into the masses. And he said somewhere along the line, they had mistaken Lucifer or equated him to be the devil. And they thought that he was one of God's fallen angels. Lucifer said that couldn't be further from the truth because he was actually a very benevolent angel who had been working behind the scenes for many years trying to curtail evil on our planet. And so by way of example, he said that he had encouraged President Lincoln to abolish slavery. He had convinced the Nazi scientists during World War II to drag their feet on the development of the A-bomb for Germany so that Hitler would not be able to use the bomb in World War II. And this is going to date me, but he had, because I remember this very well, he asserted that he had exerted his considerable influence to stop Nikita Khrushchev from starting World War III during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. And that I remember very well. I was a young lad, and we all thought that the world was going to come to an end. It didn't. Lucifer admitted that his influence did not always work, but which is why there's still so much evil and violence on our planet. But he resolved to continue his mission to try to encourage humans to stop the abuse and evil and conflicts on our planet. So after bidding Lucifer farewell, I wondered what other surprises Albert had up his sleeve. And he did not disappoint me. I'd seen many amazing scenes on my trips with Albert, some of which, as I described earlier, were very distressing to me, like the scenes of animal abuse and my visit with Ahmed. But he took me on a trip which was actually truly very frightening for me. He took me to visit a black hole in the center of our galaxy. Well, as you know, black holes, astronomers say that black holes are formed typically when a star collapses on itself, creating a very dense mass that has such a strong gravitational pull that nothing can escape its clutches, not even light. So I had no idea why Albert was taking me there. But as we plunged into the core of this black hole, I experienced something I'd never ever encountered before: total sensory deprivation and total isolation. I could not see, hear, or feel anything. I was enveloped in total blackness, and I had no sense of passing time. Albert had seemingly disappeared. I couldn't see him anywhere, and I was all alone in this terrifying pit of darkness and despair, and there was no way to escape. I felt the panic welling up in my chest as I thought that perhaps Albert had tricked me to going to hell, even though he said it didn't exist. And I thought, maybe I'm in hell, and I might be stuck in this accursed netherworld forever. And then I saw a tiny pinprick of light off in the distance. And the light grew larger as it approached me. And soon it engulfed me totally and shut out the darkness. And I find myself in a very strange world. It reminded me of the diagram of an atom I had studied in school. There was a nucleus in the center and a ring of what looked like electrons orbiting around it, much like the nucleus of an atom surrounded by orbiting electrons. And then I felt an invisible force pushing me away and zooming me out. And then I noticed that there were other similar atoms had clumped together to form a molecule. And as I continued to zoom away, I noticed that these molecules had all clumped together to form a very shiny black substance that sparkled in the sunlight. And then I found myself emerging from the glass eye of a teddy bear sitting on the shelf in my family room. And there I saw Albert standing beside me, grinning from ear to ear. He said that I was only in the black hole for maybe 30 seconds of Earth time, and he had been there with me all along. And he said that he had chosen to hide himself because he wanted me to feel the sadness of being all alone. Well, I certainly didn't want to go back there again, and I asked Albert to promise to never take me there again. And Albert said, not to worry, I won't take you back there again, and in fact, I'm going to make it up to you on the next trip. And so he did. Back on the spirit side, I was introduced to a handsome young man named Wotan. He had dark black hair, light brown skin, and piercing green eyes. And he told me that he and I had lived together in a past life in Tikal, part of the Mayan Empire, and that he had been a court scribe and I had been a lady in waiting to the daughter of the monarch. And we'd actually got married in that life and had a happy life and had many children. But then, without further ado, Wotan stepped into me, and our bodies joined together for a few moments of sheer ecstasy. It was a rapturous dance that left me aching with pleasure from the sheer exhilaration of the merger of our divine energies. And then Wotan stepped back to end the frolic, and he was grinning widely as he announced to me that I had just enjoyed the dance of heavenly bliss. And he said that souls on the spirit side do this frequently and openly as a way of expressing their love for one another. And he said it's something I can look forward to when I cross over to the spirit side myself. Well, he got that right. I can't wait to get back there to do that again. Those, my friends, were a few highlights from the astral trips I took with Albert, which I describe in my third book, Dance of Heavenly Bliss. I don't have time to discuss all of the various trips, but I encourage you to read my book, and you can get the full details. As I mentioned before, Albert organized these trips not to entertain me, but to impart a lesson to me and all humanity, or to provide us with a nugget of wisdom. It's Albert's desire to ensure to encourage humans to get rid of their negative emotions and embrace love and compassion so that we can live peacefully and in harmony with each other, with the other creatures on our planet, and with the planet we live on, with Mother Earth. And that is really his goal, and that's why he enlisted me to be one of his messengers, a task that I was reluctant to do so at first, but now I'm very happy to follow his wishes, and I'll keep on writing books as long as he has a message for me to give to everyone. So I don't know, do we have time for questions, Julia? No time for questions. Okay. Well, as soon as I leave the stage, I will be going down to the vendor's hall at my table to sign my books. I'd love to meet every one of you in person, and I'd love to see everyone at the speakers' dinner tonight. Thank you all for being here.